Hello friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about RBI's role in economic slowdown, inflation and economic growth. As we know, RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, it is a central bank of Indian economy. It is also the apex monetary institution of the country, and also RBI is responsible for framing the monetary policy of the country. Now when we talk about the important mandates or the important functions of RBI, the first one, it acts as a central bank of the economy. Secondly, it is also the bank to other banks in the economy. Thirdly, it is the bank to the central government and the state governments because they have to keep accounts with RBI. And next one is that it frames monetary policy for the economy. The MPC or the monetary policy headed by the governor of RBI frames the monetary policy. So monetary policy is also the responsibility of RBI. Now fifth one is inflation control. Sixth one is to ensure economic growth through its policies. Seventh, it acts as a regulator of banks in the sense that it monitors the banks, has the supervisory role over the banks. So these are all some of the functions. So these are all some of the mandates or the role of the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central bank of Indian economy. So why I have mentioned about the role and functions is that in this lecture we will be analyzing the role or the functions of RBI in economic slowdown. So what was the role of RBI in economic slowdown, or how RBI would have intervened into the economy to better deal with the economic slowdown. Second one, the inflation. Third one, the economic growth. So this is what we will discuss today. So let us start with the current affair. Now the current affair is that the Indian economy is at a situation where the banking system, where the economy is under certain pressure and stress. The first one, the RBI, which is the central bank of Indian economy, RBI's reputation or RBI's credibility as a regulator has been affected very seriously. The credibility of RBI is now in question. RBI, as I said, is the central bank of the economy, and also it is the regulator of the banking system. So being a regulator to the banking system in India is one among the most important functions of RBI, and in this regard RBI is responsible for supervision of the banks, regulation of the banks, monitoring of the banks, etc. Now there are serious credibility issues on RBI these days. This is because the instances of fraud in the banking system has increased these days. Now if we take the example, in the last 1 or 2 years, the Punjab National Bank fraud, PNB. Now second one, the ILNFS crisis. ILNFS is an NBFC, non-banking financial company. So NBFC is also considered as a shadow banking industry in India. Now very recent example is the PMC crisis, that is the Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank issue. So these are all considered to be very serious fraud in the banking sector. So various instances of fraud have been reported in the banking sector very recently, and as a regulator, as a supervisor, and with the monitoring role of RBI, these instances of fraud have been put RBI under a question of credibility. The credibility of RBI as a regulator, the reputation of RBI as a regulator has been very seriously impacted. Now, second issue is with the economic slowdown. Now, as you all know, the Indian economy is going through a phase of economic slowdown. And what is the connection between RBI and the economic slowdown? We need to understand this. Now let us see how RBI ensures economic stability or economic growth in an economy. As I said, one of the major functions of RBI is to frame monetary policy for the country. So monetary policy is framed by the MPC or the Monetary Policy Committee, which has got 6 members, 3 each from government and from the RBI. So 3 plus 3, 6 members. Now the chairman of the Monetary Policy Committee, it is chaired by the governor of RBI. So the monetary policy formulation is the responsibility of RBI itself. Now, what is the objective of monetary policy? The objective of monetary policy is to maintain a balance between two important factors. The first one is inflation, second one is economic growth. Now, how are these two factors interconnected? We need to understand this. Now, the monetary policy of RBI, basically what it does, it will announce its policies for the economy, and the policies are announced through setting up of certain interest rates, which is called the benchmark interest rates. I will come to it very clearly, then you will understand the connection. Now, the benchmark interest rate and repo rate is considered as the benchmark interest rate. Now, what is meant by repo rate? A repo rate is the rate at which RBI will lend to the commercial banks. So, commercial banks can borrow from RBI for a short period of time, and the interest charged by the RBI, the central bank, from the commercial banks is called the repo rate. Now, repo rate is considered as the benchmark interest rate. Now, how it will ensure economic growth and how it will control inflation? So, we need to understand two things. First one, what is inflation? Second one, we need to understand what is economic growth, how it is measured. First, let us come to inflation. Inflation means a persistent increase in the prices of commodities. So, in other words, we can say that inflation is the excess of money supply in the market. When money supply is excess, the demand will be more, and when demand is more, the price will increase. So, inflation is actually the increase in money supply in an economy. Now, second one is economic growth. What is economic growth and how it is measured? Economic growth refers to the increase in the output generated by the economy, and this is measured in terms of GDP or gross domestic product. GDP is the monetary value of all the final goods and services produced in an economy in a financial year. So, when GDP increases, we assume that the output generated in the economy increases, therefore economic growth rate has increased. So, control of inflation and also ensuring economic growth, this is the purpose of monetary policy, and it has to maintain a balance. So, that is why we said the purpose is to maintain a balance. Now, how can this balance be maintained? Let us come to it. Very important concept. Now, we said that monetary policy, what it actually does is it will increase or decrease the benchmark interest rate called the repo rate. So, when the repo rate or the benchmark interest rate is increased, what will happen? The rate at which, the interest rate at which RBI will lend to the commercial banks will increase. Therefore, commercial banks will increase their interest rate. So, when interest rate increases, what will happen? Money supply will come down. When there is higher rates of interest, less number of people will borrow from the banks and financial institutions. So, money supply will come down. Now, let us see the other way. When repo rate decreases, the commercial banks will be able to borrow money from the RBI at lesser rates of interest. Therefore, commercial banks will get cheap money from RBI, so they will also reduce the interest rates. So, what will happen? When the interest rate is less, the money supply will increase. More people will borrow money from the banks. So, what happens is that when money supply decreases, inflation also decreases. When money supply increases, inflation also increases. But here what we need to understand is the relationship between money supply and economic growth. When money supply increases, economic growth increases. This is because more people will borrow money, more investments will take place, there will be more demand, more supply, more output. So, economic growth increases. When money supply is high. Now, when money supply is less, what will happen? When money supply is less, the economic growth rates will come down. This is because with lesser money supply, lesser borrowings takes place, lesser people will borrow money, lesser investment, lesser output, lesser demand. So, this is the interrelation or the connection. Now, who is responsible for framing this monetary policy? The RBI. So, the present economic slowdown, this is represented in terms of GDP. The GDP growth of the economy has come down. So, RBI is in a way responsible for this also. Now, in the current affair portion itself, I have explained to you all the concepts that is related to economic growth and also about monetary policy, the relationship between monetary policy and economic growth, with that of inflation, everything I have explained in the current affairs section itself. Now, as we move on to the analysis of this issue, things will be better for you, things will be easier for you. So, let us move on. Let us first understand how is the central banks in the West. How is the performance of the central banks in the West? It refers mainly to the United States. Now, let us see. When we look at the Western countries, the central banks have a very important position in their economies. This is because in the Western countries, most of the countries, their economies are market economies. Now, what is meant by market economies? Market economies refers to those economies where there is very less government intervention. So, government intervention is very less or nil. So, government will not interfere. Instead, the government has left everything to the market. Now, what does this market refers to? Market refers to two factors. One is demand and second one is supply. So, demand and supply together constitutes market. So, in Western economies, government intervention is zero or nil in the market, and the market forces of demand and supply decides everything. What everything? First one, what has to be produced. Now, second, how it has to be produced, and third one, for whom it has to be produced. These three are the basic questions in economics. So, these three things are decided by the market itself, by the demand and supply factors itself. Now, here what is the question or what is the debate? Now, if we understand the economy in US, the US economy, first thing, it is a market economy where there is very less government intervention. The demand and the supply forces determine everything. Second thing about US economy, the second thing about US, the political situation, it is a democracy. It is the world's first democracy. So, a democracy means people elect their leaders or representatives. Now, third thing to be understood here is that the Central Bank of USA, which is known as the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve is a unelected body, or this does not represent the people. So, people does not directly elect the members of the Federal Reserve. So, the important question here is that how an unelected body like the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank of US economy, can decide upon very, very important factors, very significant things that guides an economy. Now, what is the idea behind this? Even though the US has a democracy, the central bank of the US economy is very prominent, very powerful. Why this is so? This is because the idea in the US economy is actually profit maximization. The US economy is guided by the principle of maximum creation of wealth by private individuals, and the goals of distribution of income and ensuring economic stability. These are not allowed to interrupt the private individuals. So, the basic objective is profit maximization by the private individuals. So, that is the reason why public regulation is rejected. Public regulation here refers to government regulation. This is because the public regulation or the government regulation will set limits to private activity. So, that is why in Western countries we will see that the government has a very limited role. Now, let us see how does the inflation impact an economy. Now, first, when we understand about the producers, if it is an unanticipated inflation or an unexpected inflation, the producers are least expected about an inflation. Then what will happen? It is a problem for producers. This is because the profit calculations or the profit margins of the producers will be in trouble. Now, let us come to fixed income earners. Suppose you are earning a fixed income of 10,000 rupees, and with this 10,000 rupees you are able to buy 100 units. That means each unit costs you 100 rupees. So, you are able to buy 100 units. Now, for example, in a situation where there is an inflation means there is an increase in the prices. Now, for example, one unit is costing you rupees 200. So, what will happen? You will not be able to purchase 100 units. Instead, you can only purchase 50 units. This is because Your income is fixed. So for fixed income earners, especially those who are working in the unorganized sector where there is no provision for dearness allowance or DA, inflation is very bad because this will impact the purchasing power of those individuals. Now, third category is the borrowers. For the borrowers, inflation is good. Why? The reason is that the real value is now less. Now, for example, you have borrowed rupees 1 lakh. This is in the year 2010. Now, in the year 2015, let us assume that there is inflation. So, inflation means increase in the prices. Increase in the prices means when we talk about cash or money, instead of price, the value of rupees will increase. Now, in 2010, with that 1 lakh rupee, you were able to purchase 1000 units of a commodity. But in 2015, the rate of inflation has increased. Thereby, with that 1 lakh rupee, what has happened? You cannot purchase 1000 units. Instead, you can purchase only 800 units. So, what has happened? What makes the difference? This is because the value of money has increased over a period of 5 years due to inflation. But again, in 2015, you have to repay only 1 lakh rupee because you borrowed 1 lakh rupee. So, who is the gainer here? The borrower is the gainer. So, this is how the inflation positively impacts the borrowers. Now, let us come to inflation control policy. In India, now we have adopted inflation targeting. Now, inflation targeting is decided by the government of India. You should not confuse it with RBI. So, the central government decides the inflation targeting, whereas the implementation is done by the RBI. So, you should not confuse it, especially in your UPSC examination. This can be expected in your preliminary examination. So, inflation targeting is set up by the government and it is implemented by RBI. So, what is meant by inflation targeting? Inflation targeting means the government decides with the help of RBI what should be the rate of inflation in an economy, what should be the ideal rate of inflation in an economy. So, for India, we have set it as 2 to 6%, that is 4 plus or minus 2%. This is our inflation targeting we have adopted in India. So, this is done by the central government with the help of RBI. Now, in order to achieve the target set up in inflation targeting, what will the RBI do? The central bank will regulate the interest rates. Regulation means increase or decrease the interest rates. Now, what is this interest rate mentioned here? It is the repo rate, which is the benchmark interest rate. I have explained to you how this works out in the introduction of this lecture itself. So, I hope you have a clear idea on how the repo rate will act as a factor that will regulate the money supply and the inflation in the economy. Now, let us see what is the effect of it. So, as I said in the beginning, in order to bring down the inflation rates in the economy, what will happen? The interest rates will be increased in order to reduce the money supply. So, first thing what happens? The RBI will increase the interest rates. So, as interest rate increases, money supply will decrease, thereby inflation also will decrease. But what is the effect of this? The central bank would be targeting on inflation. But the effect is that the economic growth will come down. This is because lesser people have access to finance, the interest rates are very high, then the investments also comes down. So, because of this, the economic growth is getting impacted. I have very well explained this concept in the beginning of this lecture. I am not repeating it again here. Now, second one is that the employment achievement also will not be achieved. This is because when the economic growth comes down, what happens? The output will come down. So, as the output comes down, what will happen? There is only a need for lesser people in the employment. So, employment rates also will come down. So, this has got a serious impact on employment and economic growth. So, we can say that inflation targeting via the interest rate can lower the inflation. So, if interest rate is increased, this will definitely reduce the rate of inflation, but this will suppress the economic growth, and this is what is called the monetary policy dilemma. This is because the monetary policy cannot achieve both the targets of economic growth and inflation control altogether. But what it can do is to maintain a balance between both of these. So this is the role of RBI in controlling inflation, in ensuring economic growth, and also in dealing with the economic slowdown. You can find the PDF of this lecture on our website www.studyiq.com. You can also follow my Facebook page for more video updates. You can write to me at joyce.studyiq@gmail.com for any of your queries and clarification. Thank you.